Well, I stayed up way too late a couple of weeks ago and spent a bunch of money on a brand that I've been really impressed with. So let's take a look at the tools I got and see if any of them work for you. So contrary to popular belief, having a YouTube channel, especially a woodworking one, isn't necessarily profitable. Now, every once in a while, here and there, I will get a tool for free, and I like to show only the good ones on this channel, but this is not one of those videos. Every one of the 4 tools that we're going to take a look at today, I purchased with my own money, and it cost about 200 bucks, which frankly is not that bad of a price for these 4 tools. But since I spent my own money on these tools, I'm not going to sugarcoat this at all. And judging from the videos I've seen online the last couple of weeks, I'm guessing that this brand has given away a lot of these tools to the larger YouTube channels. But this ain't one of those channels, and if you haven't guessed the brand already, you probably recognize that red and yellow color. That's right, we're going to take a look at 4 Milescraft tools that I just got from my shop. But before we do that, let me show you why I love this brand. And here's a look at the Milescraft products that I've purchased over the years, and this isn't even all of them. I actually had to go to my Amazon account and search for Milescraft to see all the products that I've purchased. And there's a lot of them here, but some stand out more than others. Let me show you some of my favorites. First off, let's talk about sanding. These are a couple of sanding blocks made by Milescraft called the Edge Sander as well as the Sand Plane. Now these are not an everyday tool, but when you need them, they're wonderful. Now the nice thing about these is they take 5-inch orbital sandpaper. That means that they both take standard hook and loop sandpaper that you just slide right on top. And both of these sanders have different profiles. The Edge Sander has a little divot right down the center so that you can soften your edges. And the Sand Plane actually has 3 different types of profiles. It's got a concave profile, a corner profile, and a flat profile. And these simply attach to the very bottom of the sand plane by snapping them into the 2 holes on bottom. The next set of Milescraft tools that I have are my push blocks, and these are tools that are used on a daily basis. And these 2 items are the GrabberPLUS and the GrabberPRO, and these are great, cheaper alternatives to the higher priced micro jig push blocks. And I actually like the design of these 2 push blocks a little bit better than the micro jig ones. Let me show you why. If we compare the GrabberPRO to the gripper, you can see that the GrabberPRO is a much bigger unit, giving you that much more support. But one thing that I really like about the GrabberPRO is this angled handle. It's a much better feel than what you get with the gripper. And the GrabberPLUS also has its advantages. Let's compare it to the micro jig grip block. Now once again, the Milescraft unit has a slightly larger footprint than the micro jig unit, and it's also got that angled handle. But the real reason why I like the GrabberPLUS over the grip block has to do with the cleats on the front and the back. Now if you've ever dealt with the grip block, you'll know that these little tabs on the very back can be very difficult to put into position. In fact, sometimes I can't even get them to move. And in my opinion, the Milescraft version has a much better design. Their tabs are spring-loaded, and when you want them to stay in position, all you need to do is to twist the knob on the very end. Finally, I've got a couple of their measuring and marking tools, and these are probably some of the best value out there. Not only does the CenterFinder work great, but it also has a step on the very top so that you can scribe out lines for things like reveals. Not to mention it's got a magnetic base, so it's easy to store and I always know where it's at. And lastly, I absolutely love this little 6-inch square. In fact, I actually did a whole video on this square comparing it to the Woodpecker 642, and there really is very little difference between these 2 squares, especially for pennies on the dollar. But that's enough about my old tools. Let's dig into some of my new Milescraft tools and see how they compare. And this first tool is brand spanking new. In fact, it was just released by the company a few weeks ago, so let's check it out. Hey Bert!
What the hell you want?
Where are you?
Just hanging out with my witches.
Milescraft, witchcraft, I get it. Will you just hand me that next tool?
You got it, cuz. Here you go.
So this is the Milescraft track saw guide. Let's check it out. I hope you're not in Salem.
Why are you talking about my smokes?
So this is going to be the most expensive thing that we're going to take a look at today, but this is one of those items that you can actually save money by spending money. At least that's what my wife always says. Now this Milescraft track saw guide may be a great way to get some of the same results that you might get with a track saw at a fraction of the price. In fact, that whole track saw guide costs less than 1 piece of Festool track. That's right, this entire track saw guide system costs $99, but let's see what you get for that price. First of all, you're going to get two pieces of 27.5-inch track, which coincidentally, when they're put together, is the same length that you get with the Festool track at 55 inches. And these two pieces of track go together very easily by adding two rail connectors to the back of the track and tightening it down with the hex key. With both of the tracks attached to each other, let's just confirm that they actually are 55 inches. And as to be expected, they come in right on target. Now there is one thing that I noticed when attaching those two rail connectors to this track. Now I didn't use any extreme force when tightening down those hex keys, but as you can see on the opposite side of the track, they actually bent the track wherever those screws were. So I'm going to keep an eye on this and make sure that it doesn't impact the performance. Another thing about this track is, unfortunately, it is a proprietary track, which means that I can't use it interchangeably with my Festool track or my Wen track. And it also means that my current track saw will not work with this system. But that's okay, that's not what this system is about. This system is about converting an ordinary circular saw to a track saw. So how do we attach our circular saw? Well, let's check it out. The first thing that we want to do is to place our saw blade spacer right up against the edge of our tabletop. Now we'll take our track saw guide and place it right on top of that spacer, making sure that the grooves on the spacer fit right into the slots on the guide. With the track saw guide in place on top of that spacer, we now want to adjust the end stops on either side of that saw guide so that they fit our saw. And this is done by placing the base plate of your circular saw into the track saw guide and adjusting the stops on either side. And you just want to make sure you're retracting your blade guard as you place it into the guide. With the saw in place, you'll now push the saw back until it hits that back end stop. Then you can adjust the front end stop and secure it into place with a screwdriver. With the front and the back end stops now tightened up around the base plate of that saw, we can now attach it to the track guide. And to do this, we'll simply take the 4S clamps and tighten them down to the base plate of that saw. With everything secured, the saw is now attached to that track guide. Now that we have our track guide attached, we now need to prepare our track so that we can make some cuts. And to do this, we first need to attach the track to a scrap piece of wood using the two included track clamps. And to do this, we simply slide our clamp into the bottom of the track and clamp it up against that wood. And we'll do this process on both sides of the track. Now before we go on to making our first cut, there's one other comment that I'd like to make about this proprietary track. And that's that most of my current track saw clamps will not work with this system, including my Festool, my Micro Jig, as well as my knockoff Festool. All of these clamps are just a little too fat to fit into that T-slot. The only clamp that I have that will fit into this T-slot is my Wen track saw clamp. But now that we have our track secure, we now need to cut the blade guard down to size, so we'll do that next. So I'll place my track saw guide right on top of that track and make my first cut. And what you're looking for here is that blade guard to be completely flush with where your cut was made. Therefore, in the future, you can use your blade guard to align your cuts. So now that our blade guard is cut to size, let's make one more cut along a line that I struck earlier. And here's that line. So what I'm going to do is align the track saw right up against that line. With the track in place, I can now tighten it down to my workpiece using a clamp on both sides. With everything secure, I'll now make my first real cut. And if we move that track to the side, we can see how nicely that cut was right up against my line. Well, I'll have to say, for the price, I'm pretty impressed with this system. But is it perfect? Absolutely not. Let me show you a couple of things that I don't like about this system. First off, you obviously have to use a circular saw with this system, and most circular saws don't have plunging capability. This means that for many of your longer cuts, you're going to actually have to start your saw before your track saw guide is fully seated on your track. And for me, that frankly just didn't feel very safe. And the reason you need to start your saw before the track saw guide is fully seated on your track is because your blade won't clear your workpiece. Without that plunging capability, you're just not going to be able to start your cut at the very end of the workpiece where your track guide is fully supported. Which in turn means that the total length of cut that you can make with this track saw is not 55 inches. In fact, it's closer to 49 inches, so you lose about 6 inches of cutting capacity. Also, the guide doesn't glide as smoothly as many of the other track saws that I've dealt with in the past, specifically the Festool track saw. And lastly, there is a little bit of play between the track saw guide and the track. Now fortunately, they do give you some bumpers to tighten up that slop. However, since the saw is already a little bit more difficult to push down that track, I'm not sure I'll add them. But let's remember, we're dealing with a tool that costs less than $100 and is not meant to compete with some of your higher end track saws. So would I recommend this tool? Sure, absolutely, especially if you're just starting out and you're on a budget. Now, I wouldn't use this tool to make high-end furniture, and frankly, that's not what it's designed for. Plus, I can't even make high-end furniture. For me, I anticipate using this tool on many outdoor projects where I'm just using a circular saw and I don't want to bring my entire track saw. Being able to attach a circular saw and just have it run down a line is a heck of a lot easier than trying to do it freehand. Well, I have to admit I'm pretty pleased with this first Milescraft tool we've taken a look at, but we have 3 more to go. So let's start to dig into our second tool. So our next tool that we're going to take a look at today is a tool that may interest some of you that are in the market for a drill press. But right off the bat, I'll go ahead and tell you this is not a replacement for a drill press. Why do I say that? Well, because I made a similar mistake when I purchased a similar item. And the item I got was this Rockler portable drill guide. I still can't believe I spent $200 on this item. The reason that I went with that expensive Rockler drill guide is because I wanted the best so that I wouldn't have to get a drill press right away. But at $200, there's a lot of affordable drill presses out there that I could have gotten. And this little guy is no drill press. However, it does give you the stability you need when you can't bring your workpiece to the drill press. So my point being that this next item is not meant to replace your drill press. However, it is meant to compete with the Rockler drill guide at a fraction of the price at only 20% of the cost. So what tool are we talking about? Well, let's check it out. Hey, Birdie Boy.
I am the father.
I never knew my father, but I bet he looked like a Wookiee.
Star Wars?
Not even close.
Milescraft, spacecraft, that's what you're doing.
You're definitely not as dumb as you look.
Can you hand me that next item?
May the force be with you, cuz.
So this is the Milescraft DrillMate portable drill press. It's not a drill press. Now, contrary to everything that I've just been saying, you'll see that even the box says right on the front, portable drill press. But we just can't use it like that. Don't make the same mistake I did. Let's see what comes inside the box. So inside the box, you're going to see that we have to do a little bit of minor assembly. You'll see the 2 guide rails as well as the chuck. You'll also find a chuck key, a handle, and the base. And this thing is really easy to put together. In fact, it took me less than a minute. With everything now put together, let's take a look at how this thing works. And there's a couple of features that I already noticed that I like better than the Rockler drill guide. The first overwhelming difference is the spring that's attached to one of the guide rails. This gives you spring back every time you depress your drill. And that's a feature that I really wish the Rockler unit had. Every time you plunge your drill, you also have to pull back up. If we compare the chucks of the 2 units, you'll notice that the Rockler is quite a bit beefier, accommodating up to a 1/2 inch bit, while the Milescraft can only accommodate 3/8 of an inch. If we look at the base of these 2 units, you'll also notice some differences. If we take a look at the Milescraft unit, you'll notice there's a stabilizing handle on the side. There's also 3 divots on the base that allow you to easily accommodate round stock. The Rockler unit has a base that's substantially larger, and it does have 2 handles. The problem with having 2 handles, however, is you have to have 1 handle on the drill, so you really only need 1 handle. You'll also notice a line to line up your measurements and a little divot so that you can accommodate round stock. Now, if you've ever worked with either one of these units, you know that chatter can be an issue. Fortunately, however, both units have a solution. Both drill guides have 4 holes on the bottom that either allow you to mount it to your workpiece or attach it to a larger frame. Now, one thing that the Milescraft version has that the Rockler doesn't is self-centering capabilities. Let me show you how that works. If we look at the underside of the base, you'll notice there's a little arch with 2 ledges on either side. It's those ledges that allow you to straddle your wood and make sure that you're drilling your holes right in the center of your stock. This can be ideal when you're drilling holes for things like dowels. Before we take a look at the last feature of this Milescraft drill guide, let's make sure that when we're drilling at 90 degrees, it's actually at 90 degrees. And I'll have to say, everything looks dead on from where I sit. If you are seeing any variances, it's due to parallax from the camera. Now let's talk about both units' capabilities to drill at an angle. If we look at the side view, you can see that the Rockler gives you a little bit more flexibility with the ability to go to 60 degrees, while the Milescraft only goes to 45 degrees. But I'm going to be frank and say that it's very difficult to do any type of angle drilling with tools like this. And that's because as soon as you add a drill to the top of these units, they become inherently top heavy. Even the smallest angle of 15 degrees becomes very difficult to manage and just leaves a lot of room for error. And that's because you really have to fight the base of your drill guide to keep it flat and level with your workpiece. The final thing that I want to discuss are the depth stops. Now the Rockler has 2 depth stops on either side of the rails. But since the Milescraft has one rail occupied by the spring, there's only one stop on the other rail. Well, that just about covers all of the basic features of the Milescraft portable drill press. The only thing left to do is to test this thing out. And I'm going to do a direct comparison here. I'm going to use the exact same drill on both drill guides, and I've got the same 3/16 inch bit installed on both units. So let's first start off with the Rockler drill guide. And as you can see, I want to drill right into those crosshairs. And what I'm really looking for is if there's any chatter. And as you can see here, there's smooth rotation and very little chatter, especially at the 90-degree angle. But let's test out that Milescraft and see if there's any difference. So as you saw, there's comparable chatter on both units, maybe just a little bit more with the Milescraft, but I remind you once again, this is 20% of the cost of the Rockler. And here's a direct comparison of both units side by side with each other so that you can get a better understanding between the differences. Well, I don't know about you, but I'm pretty impressed with this Milescraft drill guide. Now, all drill guides do have their limitations, and if you are in the market for a drill press, I think this is a better option. I'll leave some links in the description below for some great options at $200 or less for a drill press. Well, that takes us through 2 Milescraft tools so far, and only 2 more left to take a look at. Before we move on to our third, I ask you to do me a huge favor, hit that subscribe button, leave a like, and leave a comment. It really does help out this small woodworking channel. Also, if any of these Milescraft tools interest you, just like I do with all my videos, I'll leave links in the description below so that you can go check them out for yourself. Lastly, if you're interested in supporting the channel, check out my website, www.flynndogwoodwork.com. There you can find some fun woodworking accessories as well as things like the t-shirts that I wear in my video. Now let's move on to our third Milescraft tool. So our third tool we're going to take a look at today might be a great addition for any woodworker in the process of building cabinets, which would include me. Now, one thing that I did with the cabinets I'm building is I did add some shelf pin holes. And shelf pin holes are a great and easy way to have adjustable shelves in your cabinets without a lot of work. Now, they may not be as sturdy as a shelf created with a dado, but I like having the flexibility. And that's exactly why we're going to take a look at this next tool. Let's see what Bert's up to. Bert!
This game ain't as hard as I thought. You don't need to use your mind at all.
Oh my gosh, it's Minecraft, not Mindcraft.
What'd I say?
Rarely do I know. Will you just hand me that next tool?
You know I got you, cuz. Here you go.
So this is the Milescraft CabinetMate. Let's open it up and take a look. So this CabinetMate is a pretty simple jig with not a whole lot of moving parts. And there's one thing about this jig that really caught my eye. If we take a closer look at the jig, you'll notice that there's a storage compartment right on top. This storage compartment holds a hex key as well as 2 indexing pins as well as a self-centering bit. And it's this self-centering bit that really caught my attention. Now, with typical shelf pin jigs, you're going to be working with a drill bit that you place a collar onto. And it's that collar that sets the depth of your shelf pin hole. But if you've had any experiences like me, you'll know that that collar can tend to move. And when it moves, all of your holes are getting deeper and deeper until you finally blow out the other side of your plywood. But this bit works entirely differently. Let's take a closer look. If we look at the bit, it's got a permanent collar, and when you compress it, it self-centers and exposes that bit, which is a brad point bit, which automatically eliminates the potential for blowout on the opposite side of your shelf pin holes. And it's that collar that easily slides into any of the 11 shelf pin holes. Now, the jig that I bought came with a 1/4 inch bit, but they also make these in 5mm. And you can actually buy the bit separately in case you want to have both measurements. And this jig has the ability to store 2 bits in the storage compartment. Now, I already mentioned that this jig has 11 holes, which is kind of nice because all the previous jigs I've had only have 7, and each one of these holes is 32mm apart. And there's 2 rows of them, one at 1 7/16 inches as well as one at 2.5 inches. And you'll also notice some smaller holes. These are designed to help you install European style hinges. These holes allow you to take your pencils so that you can mark out where you need to pre-drill your holes for the screws on those European hinges. So let's take a quick look at how you use this jig to drill out some shelf pin holes on a scrap piece of plywood. So it's that storage container that you're actually going to use as a reference surface on the edge of your plywood. Once you have your jig positioned, you can drill out your first hole. Once you've drilled out your first hole, you can slide the jig up and place an indexing pin in that first hole. And with that pin in place, you can drill out 10 more holes. And once you've done those, you can remove the indexing pin, move the jig down, and continue with the process. And once everything is said and done, you can see the results are nice, clean shelf pin holes. So another pretty cool little gadget from Milescraft. I think one of my favorite things about this jig, other than the drill bit, is the little storage compartment so that you can put everything away until you need to use it the next time. Well, that takes us through 3 of the 4 Milescraft tools that we're going to take a look at today. Our last tool is also a great accessory for those that build cabinets. Now, if you watched my video on building cabinets 4 different ways, you'll know that I came to the realization that building cabinets with pocket hole screws was the way to go. And over the last few years, I've also realized that Craig isn't the only company in the pocket hole game. There's a lot of knockoffs out there, and I've even taken a look at a couple of them on this channel, but I had no idea that Milescraft was also in the game. So let's see what Bert's up to and check out our last item. Bert!
What?
Woodcraft's all you got?
No, you idiot. I'm buying wood for my boat. That Seacraft ain't gonna make itself.
Figures. Will you hand me that next tool?
You got it.
So this is the Milescraft Pocket Jig 200. Let's check it out. So one of the first things that you'll notice about this kit is it comes in a hard shell case, which is really nice, but let's see what's inside. If we open up the box, you can see that everything has its own place, which is really nice. And inside you're going to find the jig itself as well as an Allen wrench. You'll also see a depth stop, a quick connect, and a 3/8 inch pocket bit. Lastly, you'll see a 6-inch T20 driver as well as a 3-inch T20 driver. You'll also find a couple of tabs on the bottom that say lift here, so let's take a look at what's underneath. Underneath you're going to find plenty of storage for things like pocket hole screws and plugs. So let's take a closer look at the jig itself and see how it's constructed. On the very top of the jig, you're going to find a red button, and this is a quick release so that you can adjust the jig for 4 different thicknesses of wood, including 1/2 inch, 3/4 inch, 1 inch, and 1.5 inches. When you press that red button, it moves a pin on the back of the jig that locks into place for each of those 4 thicknesses. You also may have noticed a circular area on the top of the jig. Let's take a look at what that's for. This is actually a powerful magnet to hold a face clamp into position. And once that face clamp is in position, you can lock that jig into place. Now let's take a look at the very end of the jig, which has kind of a unique feature. The end of this jig can be rotated into 2 positions. One position allows you to hook it on the very edge of your workpiece. But if we rotate it around the other way, it allows you to butt it up into a corner. The end of the jig also allows you to set the collar on your drill bit. Let's take a look at how that works. First up, you need to figure out the thickness of your material. So you'll take your material and place it right on top of that lip and use the scale on the side to figure out that thickness. In this case, 3/4 inch. Once you know the thickness of your material, you'll depress that red button on top and adjust the jig to 3/4 inch. The next thing we'll do is to flip the jig upside down. Once that jig is upside down, we'll take our bit with the collar on it and slide the collar right into the groove on the end. And then we'll take the tip of the bit and make sure it's in the little notch in the very front. And what we're trying to confirm here is that the step of the bit is right where the line is on the jig. With all of those alignments made, we can lock our collar into place with the hex key. Then we can take our jig and place it onto our workpiece using the fence on the end, clamp it down with our face clamps, and then drill out our holes. With the holes drilled out, we can remove the jig and take a look at the results. And just like I expected, 2 beautiful pocket holes. With our holes drilled out, we can now add a couple of screws. Now these screws are a little bit different with this Milescraft set. And that's because the Milescraft set comes with star bits and screws versus the Robertson bits that you typically find with pocket hole jigs. But you could easily exchange these bits for Robertson bits so that you could use the 2 interchangeably. And once those screws are driven in, your joinery is complete. Well, this is not a bad system at all. I actually have the Craig system and I prefer this Milescraft over the Craig, and the Craig is just a little bit more expensive. So I'm pretty pleased with all 4 Milescraft tools that we took a look at today. There's some that I'm more impressed with than others, but all in all, this was a great video. Well, I hope you enjoyed today's video. I know I had a lot of fun showing you my 4 new Milescraft tools that I got from my shop. If you haven't already, make sure you hit that subscribe button, as it truly does help out this small woodworking channel. Only about 20% of the people that watch my videos are actually subscribed. Also, check out my new website, www.flynndogwoodwork.com. There you can find some fun woodworking accessories like all the t-shirts that I wear in my videos. Until next time, take care as always.
With all the money that boy spent on Milescraft, he should get a Milescraft sponsorship. Help that boy out and subscribe.